Hi, my name's Joe Cernik. I'm a member of the faculty here at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, and this is a show called Insight. On Insight, we discuss books primarily on politics, both domestically and internationally, sometimes historical books that provide an insight into the present, and then sometimes just other types of books that are interesting and should be examined because it's a show about discussing books. Today we are discussing a book on Donald Trump. It's called The Making of Donald Trump, written by David K. Johnston. David K. Johnston has written for a number of publications, including the New York Times. He's won the Pulitzer Prize. He's currently on the law school faculty at Syracuse University. Joining me on the show today are three Lindenwood University students. To my immediate right is Jonah Mead Van-Cort. To Jonah's right is Moses Milan. And to Moses' right is Jessie Basler. So I wanted to read an opening quote from the book just so you get a sense of where the author's coming from and sort of the general theme about how he's looking at this book. So the author writes, having covered Donald Trump intensely from 1988 through 1995 and following him ever since, I knew him well. The gap between Trump's public image and reality is what I write about in this book. I knew Trump had spent a lifetime cheating and lying and displaying remarkable success at getting away with it, whether he was shorting workers, illegal immigrants included, refusing to pay vendors after they delivered goods and services, swindling investors, or bullying anyone who stood between him and his next pile of easy money. Trump preyed on the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of others, and he spent vast amounts of time currying favors with journalists, mostly those who never let facts get in the way of a good story. Only a few journalists checked and cross-checked his claims and didn't buy his nonsense. Faced with skeptical scrutiny, Trump turned to menacing phone calls and visits to editors, sometimes with lawyers threatening lawsuits, and in one case filing one to suppress inconvenient facts he cannot make go away.
Well, when reading this book by Mr. Johnston, it was first good to know that it was coming from someone who has spent so much time with him that he's going to have a very large amount of credibility on this topic. And after reading this entire book, I've had my previous beliefs reinforced that Trump is three things. He is a class top-level narcissist, he is amoral, and he is a classic con artist. And that is the three conclusions I took away from after reading this book.
Well, I think without a doubt, the Trump image is different from Trump as a person, and I think that's why it's called an image. Trump has spent the majority of his time and money trying to reinforce this view of him, a brand, if you will, that's a little different from who he is as a person. A lot of people who meet Trump say he's very, very bland, very quiet, which is in contrast to who the image of Trump would be as this flamboyant showman. I don't think anyone would deny Trump has certain moral failings. He's definitely a little high on himself. What I think the book does is make a lot of tenuous, very flimsy connections between Trump and some of the darker aspects of life in New York.
My experience with this book is going in knowing that the author has an extensive relationship with Trump. He's investigated journalists that has followed Trump through decades of time and experience. And the interesting thing I found is that I do have a lot of preconceived notions about Mr. Trump. The issue with this book, I find, is that it is very, from one perspective, one-sided on their perspective against Trump, but it does back that up with the facts and the analysis that it has throughout these decades, which I find very interesting. I learned a lot more about Trump's past, his background, and his family that is not in the public eye that we so frequently see.
When I read the book, and I see this with politicians that I've spent years studying in general, is that the idea of sort of saying, okay, I'm reading a book, and as I got through the book, because as I'm picking the book up to say, okay, I want to read it, and I'm trying to read a sense of some book reviews about it, should we read it, etc., is that I'm thinking, okay, he has an extensive knowledge of Trump, and that to me was a good reason to read the book. But the idea of reading a book and saying Trump does not come across good in any way in this book doesn't mean you can't still like him as president and whatever policies you think he's doing. You're still sort of trying to understand his character or personality. And so the idea of now I have an honest awareness of how to look at him, but I'm not going to run out tomorrow morning and call myself a flaming liberal, and I'm going to vote Democrat and love Hillary Clinton. And, from that, so I think what happens is people that sort of feel like they hear something nasty and mean about somebody that they may like their policies, and they say supported them and voted for him, doesn't mean you have to flip to the other side and suddenly now go and this happens all the time. People learn how to put inconvenient facts out of the way because they don't want to hear them. And in this show today, we're covering a lot of inconvenient information about Donald Trump. Certainly one of the things I found weaving itself through the book was his father's and his connections with a lot of members in organized crime. And I thought the interesting part, and one of the things I wanted to bring up, was he may claim there's something called fake news, and there may be people that want to use the term liberal media bias, but one of the things he's very critical of is that the press was showing no sense of responsibility to a broader public by mentioning any of this in any way during his run for the presidency. And so the notion of, well, now we have a right to call it fake news, fake news, fake news. Well, wait a minute. All this sort of issues here in this book, it's not brought up during the campaign. It's okay for us to know in depth anything you want about Hillary Clinton and emails, but nothing about Trump and his connection with organized crime.
Well, I think that's a fair point. I think that without a doubt the media did a very poor job of covering Trump. I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not they liked the guy. It has a lot more to do with them focusing on the racial issue and the comments and the gaffes on the campaign trail. The stuff in this book would be considered too boring for, say, a TV audience. It's hard to get people's attention with age-old mob connections and Trump committing perjury and the things we'll discuss in this. But in reality, those are the real important things, and the Mexican rapist comment and the making fun of the mentally disabled individual are really just side issues. It's the signal from the noise is what we have to look for.
I fully disagree with that statement. I find that these gaffes, as you so call them, they're displays of his character, displays of his morals, and the issue is that, yes, the media is covering them, but that's also the main topics of his conversations. His rallies were all very violent, and when he did discuss other policies, he kind of skimmed over them. A lot of the content that he used in his campaign was surface level, but the issue is we focus on these comments because they should have a greater stop. To me, truly, I despise the man, but you have to look at his politics and his policies and his experience as a businessman. But for me, I think a lot of people focused on those issues because that's where it should have ended. The first time he made fun of a mentally disabled person, very evidently, barely apologized for it. That's where his campaign, in my opinion, should have stopped. But the idea behind this book is that it shows that not only do we just have these very, very obvious moral shortcomings and very obvious discrimination policies that he has personally in his morals or lack thereof, but this book goes back into his historical experience of him growing up, his father's experience, his grandfather's experience, the family morals that they have and they all share, and it's a dynasty of this kind of culture. And so that's why I appreciate this book, is because, yes, we focus on these experiences, these awful things that he did on the campaign trail, but it also goes back into the history of this is how he's always been.
I agree with both of you on this. I do think that his comments on the campaign trail should have been discrediting as a president. That being said, I also agree that the reason that this content in this book wasn't covered as much was because to really go in and understand just the, I don't want to say atrocities, but the con schemes and the evasions and the lying, you can't just hear about it on a TV line. You need to go in, you need to read about the Polish Brigade, you need to read about Trump University, you need to read about these issues that really indicate someone who doesn't have morals, who doesn't have a compass, who just is in it for money and is willing to do anything and disregard anything of that if he can get his goal out, which is almost always a financial goal or a narcissistic propaganda goal.
There's a quote I ran across from William Buckley, who many conservatives like to think of as sort of a father, patron saint of conservatism, and he gave it back in 2000, and he said, if Trump were of a different sex, he'd be in a Miss America pageant because he loves to look at himself in the mirror. He's such a narcissist. And, you know, and here's Buckley, who, we're not sort of picking somebody who hated the Republican Party. I mean, Buckley was incredibly supportive of Barry Goldwater running for president and loved Ronald Reagan as president and loved his policies. And so you end up looking at sort of somebody who's conservative, that his comments on him were just incredible to read. And so here, you know, you're looking at this and thinking, okay, so now he's president, okay, but the book doesn't go there. It just stops because it's providing this background. I mean, one of those little interesting vignettes in the book was Woody Guthrie, who's best known as a songwriter, particularly for the song, "This Land is Your Land, This Land is My Land," and then people know that song. He writes a song against Trump's father, because Trump's father led a KKK rally in Queens, New York. And so it's called Old Man Trump. And he's writing a song about him. And I was reading that and mentioned it to a few people, and people had to run to the computer to find the lyrics to the song. It was just an oddity.
What I think is it explores the historical notions of this family, the Trump Dynasty, if you will, or the Trump Dynasty, depending on how far back you go. The idea behind the Woody Guthrie song was the racial bias of the Beach Haven Family Project. So the Trumps own these family projects, and the issue was that they found that it was basically they were preventing minorities against the Fair Housing Act from living in certain buildings, and they did a objective policy where they had multiple people go in with the same standards for their applications, but they were different races. So the white people were allowed to say, look at 2 different vacancies in 2 apartments, and when a minority came in and wanted to look at the same apartments, they were told that there was no vacancy, they couldn't view the apartments. So this is a clear discrimination towards the Fair Housing Act, and that discrimination is based on minorities. So the Justice Department sued Trump and the father, and the idea was that Cohn recommended they fight the case, but the issue is that it's a systematic thing. This is how they always been, and it's been proven through multiple cases that this family is very discriminatory. So to benefit Trump and to kind of defend him, I guess, this is the culture he was raised in, but he has fully adapted it, fully absorbed that culture, and continued to push on that discriminatory background and those vicious attacks towards minorities.
And just to go off that, that was actually brought up on one of on the campaign trail on one of his debates with Hillary Clinton, and they asked him about this, and he basically lied through his teeth and said, "I won that lawsuit. It was a nothing sandwich," and people just most people just took at him for his word for that, and it's crazy to me that something that damning was buried and not even taken into consideration on election day.
Well, I think the important thing to look at with that is, was it Trump or was it someone hired under Trump? The Trump empire is a big empire, and Trump hires, as he likes to point out, thousands of people. So what I looked for in the book was a direct connection between Trump and the discriminatory behavior, and I didn't find it, because I think what was clear was that people under Trump had been discriminating, but whether or not Trump was actually involved in that discrimination and actually making that decision wasn't established by the book. And the book did mention that Trump had multiple other buildings that did rent to blacks and Latinos and Puerto Ricans, and he was actually very well known for it. Mar-a-Lago was desegregated before it needed to be, and he insisted that they allow blacks and Jews to live at this place.
So if things like this...
I think once again, it's a question of the signal from the noise. Trump has hundreds, even more buildings, and you can find 2 or 3 that had discrimination issues. That's fine, but I would like to see an actual direct connection between Trump and the discrimination.
So if there is no direct connection, is it just his narcissism that claims, oh, I won this lawsuit, or I'm responsible for this, I built this empire, this is mine, 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 mine? And his language, you can clearly see, he uses a lot of pronouns that relate to, I did this, it's me, mine, mine. So it's my lawsuit, I won this, but he's not responsible. So why would he claim he is? Is it simply his narcissism, or he's responsible, he's been trained this way, he's built this culture?
Well, I think he's responsible to the extent that he's run the business in a broader sense. But whether or not he's responsible for something that happened in a single building by someone under his supervision, I don't think that's fair. At very least, if it is fair, it needs to be established rather than just he was sued, he settled, it must mean guilt. That's not necessarily true.
I think one of the ways he was trying to link them was through the father having marched with the KKK to then raise issues that there seemed to be clear sort of racial bias by Trump and his father. And so, yeah, I think you've got legitimate points there that he owns lots of buildings, so it would have been interesting. I can't see it in this book. I mean, after all, you're trying to keep it relatively short. But yeah, on a broader sense, and my guess is there probably will be studies done of that, you know. In other words, the book doesn't cover everything. Like there's basically, you notice there's nothing in here on his TV shows. Mm-hmm. It doesn't address that at all, which is the way we sort of think of how we might know Donald Trump prior to being president, but none of that is raised in the book.
I personally don't think that he has any deep-seated racial convictions. I think that he's more of he doesn't care that much about who someone is as long as he can make a profit off them. Mm-hmm. And I saw this mostly in the Polish brigades, and that was a scenario where he got a window washing company to knock down a New York skyscraper and didn't cut corners by not providing them with any hard hats, any masks to keep out the asbestos, which can cause untreatable cancers. And when it got hot, when people started looking into it, a lot of these people got caught by he didn't end up paying any of them, and they ended up just having to file a lawsuit, and a lot of them never actually even got the small stipend of money that they were promised originally. And that to me shows just how...
To the TV audience, the Polish brigade is the term that's used for he buys a building in Manhattan and hires a crew that's going to take it down, but they all use sledgehammers only. Mm-hmm. To take down a building, and yeah, they have no masks. There was going to be asbestos in this building, and you end up having to have lawsuits to have many of these people get paid, which also runs through the book frequently, that he will not pay vendors, he will not pay people, and here you have an enormous number of illegal immigrants who are working for him. That the Polish brigade incident was, he talked about that frequently in the book as an example of, here's one of the ways to look at Trump.
I think this instance is a very good example of Trump's business tactics. So he contracted the group of around 200 people to demolish this building, lacking all safety concerns. They had no hard hats, no goggles, no power tools, no masks, anything like that. But the workers, the fact that they weren't even citizens, they were not documented, there were no taxes, no wage proved, they were promised 12-hour for $5 an hour pay. There was rebellion between them. They were illegal Polish employees on the job with reckless endangerment. No safety inspection was ever found in records. The idea behind it is that he was trying to loophole it, but then goes through, especially on the campaign trail, but in his daily life, how he's such a professional businessman, how he's so successful, the fact that he has lawsuits against him constantly in similar situations like this. Like, for someone who is so for the wall and harsh on immigration things, for you to hire illegal immigrants is just hypocrisy, because for him, it was a business tactic. He ignores the morals until they're convenient for him and his political background. He saw, I could afford this cheap labor, there wasn't a lot of inspections, I wouldn't have to focus on a lot of safety regulations, I could get my job done for the cheapest possible way.
And And also going off that, he was using ready mix, first of all, which was being controlled by the mob. He had union people that weren't in. Once he actually went to building the new building that was there, he used the workers that weren't in the union. And the reason he was able to do that was because the union had problems with the mob because of, and Roy Cohn was tied with the union. He had mob connections, and that was also all that together able to insulate him. So he was able to cut costs and not have to deal with what most people have to deal with union pressures, trying to protect their workers, because he had people in all of those institutions that would protect him and make sure that he and his business wouldn't be hurt, it wouldn't be investigated, it wouldn't be stopped, because and that it just, to me, it shows a systemic corruption that he was part of and took advantage of from top to bottom.
Well, I think the issue of the Polish workers is something I touched on a little bit before. Was this a Trump hiring decision, or was this made by someone under Trump? Trump's defense of himself in this issue was, I hired a contractor, he hired a subcontractor, the subcontractor hired the illegal immigrants, I didn't know anything about it. I think that defense is interesting. I think there's certainly a case to be made for negligence on his part, but I don't see the case as him being directly indifferent to their well-being. Trump, he did fire them when he learned they were illegal immigrants, which is where the pay issue came, because he had been paying them before. But once he learned they were illegals, he fired them and they didn't get their pay. Now, the pay was irregular and there were some issues with that. There were a lot of those type of issues back then. So I think what we need to establish here, and what I looked for in the book and didn't find, is how did Trump directly cause this to happen? Did he hire the illegal immigrants? Did he not care? I think one thing they touched on is he had an office across the street. Now, I wasn't able to research how often he was in that office, whether or not he was supervising them directly. He apparently visited the site once or twice. I don't think that's enough of a connection to put all the blame on Donald Trump.
One thing I'll say for blame is that once the union workers demanded pay, they actually went to one of the managers of the Polish Grid and basically held him at the windows, like, you guys got to pay us. And when that manager went, he actually then called Trump, and Trump freaked out. And he called a contact in New York, and basically was like, I messed up. I hired a bunch of illegal workers, and now they're demanding pay. And what do I do? How do I get out of this? So that, to me, illustrates that he knew what was happening, and he only got cold feet once he could no longer control the situation.
Well, for the record, it actually wasn't the Polish workers that were, or the union workers that were being shortchanged. It was just the Polish workers.
That's correct.
What I would say in addition to that is, did he know they were illegals, or was that a decision made? Because there were thousands of workers demolishing Trump Tower. So was he fully aware they were illegals, or did he fire them upon learning they were illegals? That's an interesting question, and I'd like to see the answer to it, but once again, not addressed in the book.
In another section of the book, just to bring it up, Carla Bruni, who will become the First Lady of France, and he claimed that he had an affair with her. And she denied it. And apparently they met once, and her only statement about him was he's tacky. And so I thought that was an oddity, that, you know, he felt the need to create this impression that he was having some sort of, I guess, liaison or affair with her before she eventually marries the president of France to become First Lady of France. It was just an odd thing.
As the only woman on the table, I'll take this one first. So the idea behind the whole Carla Bruni is that Trump has created this playboy atmosphere for himself. He wants to be seen as a powerful alpha male surrounded by beautiful women, and he'll use whatever finances he needs to do that. The idea behind him, like, purchasing and, like, using the Miss Universe pageant and this scandal with him entering the back, he always was very focused on, I'm the alpha male, I'm dominant, look at all the women I can receive. As a woman, and as a woman who experiences other women in political backgrounds in general society, people find Trump disgusting. He's very creepy and despicable, and his treatment of women and the comments he makes about women are blatantly sexist at best. And the issue with the Italian model is that she clearly stated, like, she was not in a relationship with him. She did not find him attractive. They were not dating, and it was claimed that he called a PR specialist and claimed to be his own PR specialist when he was talking about Carla Bruni, saying he had multiple girlfriends at the same time, but Carla Bruni didn't leave her for Marla Maples and things like that. And it was found that it was him, and the people at the magazine listened to the call and said, this is Trump talking, not a PR specialist. The fact that he has to defend himself that much and create this facade of a Playboy actor is just, it's sad, really. I pity him for it. It's the
I don't think Trump is the first man to have over-exaggerated or overstated his connections to certain women. I think this was a very odd thing to put in a book of this tenor. The vast majority of the chapters are on his business dealings, on his family. So I thought it was very odd to put an alleged affair in there. I think believing either one of these people, be it Carla Bruni or Donald Trump, I don't see how you could see either one as credible. They had, it's unclear whether they were together to begin with, but if they were, they obviously had a very violent breakup. And I don't think it's very I guess, poor to believe either side of these relationships. It's like believing divorce records. No one's going to tell the truth. They're going to conflate their side of the story to make themselves look better. So as far as Trump goes, was there misdeeds on Trump's part? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think it's important to the extent that it should be brought up in a book like this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have two quick things to say about that. First is that this whole false affair is a pattern of, it was either John Barron or it was John Mills, and it was his pattern of calling as these two personas and basically implanting stories about himself.
And that was odd, that these people,
Sure.
It was like, it was Donald Trump, but he'd call as someone else and be his own PR person.
And that was confirmed. And the second thing that I want to say is that he had multiple, this is a pattern with him. If you go up to Donald Trump, and this is the great example is in the Hillary Clinton falling asleep for the Benghazi attack. Someone went up to him and said a lie to his face. They're like, what do you think about Hillary Clinton falling asleep for the Benghazi attack? Which didn't happen. He gave a response, an emotional response. He was like, oh, it was horrible. I can't believe she did that. So Trump has been shown to be willing to have a rubric of lies that he tells about when someone brings up something that he's known nothing about, regardless of whether or not it's true, regardless of how much he knows about it. This is what happened when they brought up this Carla Bruni thing. He just rolled with it with his textbook response.
Well, make note.
We only have seconds left. So you each got about 10 to 15 seconds. What do you think of the book?
I think it would be great to read if you are wanting to know about Trump, but you are moderate or a supporter of him, but not if you already hate him.
Well, I think the book was interesting. I think it's a very easy read. It was all over the place. There was a lot of topics. I think the book was based on a lot of very flimsy, very tenuous connections. I think if he had stuck to 2 or 3 topics and made a strong case, that would have been a much better book, as opposed to what he did, which is make very flimsy cases on things like the Polish workers and Carla Bruni.
As someone who finds Trump nauseating, I thought the book was a hard read because that's the main topic, and I had to read about him for 5 hours. But the book itself is excellent. I think it follows a lot of different tactics.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today. Some views on the book.